Fantastic. Great. Well, welcome everybody to our monthly community call for ACRE DAOs. And I'm really excited that we're here with Jack to talk about his work in film and this emerging space within Web3 called Film3. And we are a community of people interested in new investment models, new business structures, and ways that we can tell different stories or sustain new ventures. I thought that kind of having some cross pollination with maybe other verticals outside of regenerative finance per se could be really interesting for us to dive into. So, I first just want to say welcome, Jack, and thanks for joining us. You're a really established and celebrated independent filmmaker in the traditional sense of the word. And so could you maybe just start off giving us a little bit of your background and the project you're working on right now?
Thanks, Kianga. I've kind of been in the documentary space for 10 years now, and still relatively on the younger side. I'm almost 32, and it's a very competitive landscape now, versus when I first started in the documentary space. You can see documentaries are consumed on a lot more of a popular level. And so in that also makes the kind of financing landscape a lot more competitive, and you've got to be innovative in ways to approach, how to get your work funded nowadays. And just so kind of was led down was always into the blockchain and been following the blockchain, and then with the birth of the NFT waves, kind of started looking into ways that there would be a crossover between the Film 2 space and the Film 3 space, and how I could fit into that landscape. I've done a lot of films with quite established talent. I worked with Sanjay Gupta before. I've worked with Lebron James. We did a film about his school in Akron, Ohio, the I Promise School. And more recently, I produced a Kevin Garnett documentary for Showtime. And I've also done a lot of stuff in the social justice and social commentary space. Based in New York, we did a film on Rikers Island, sorry. And so, I'm established enough to think about the Film 2 space and how to operate in that area for financing. But the particular project I have now, I started in that space, and it's a very kind of kitschy subject. It's about cattle mutilation, which is kind of attached to aliens and all these far-fetched theories. And a lot of the existing networks kind of couldn't pull themselves away from the existing tropes that surround that. And our vision was very unique, and was to say, no, we want to try to do something different with it. And that's where the appeal of Film 3 kind of started to stand out. It would allow us to maintain kind of control outside of the network's reach, and to pursue what we think is like an original creative vision. And so that's kind of the background of how we got to Film 3, but it can even get more granular, and how I landed up meeting you and mClub and a lot more.
Terrific. Yeah, well, yeah, I want to maybe segue to that in a bit, but I just let everyone know I've put in the chat a link to a mood reel of the project. We thought we might be able to screen some of it live through the app with a screen share, but it doesn't really translate well. So when we post the recording of this later, we'll also, so anyone who may be listening to the recording, you'll have a link to see a clip of the film, the film that's in process. So yeah, so we actually met in mClub back in December. I was, I guess, kind of lurking, as a lot of people do, getting into this space, into different discords and communities, and mClub stood out to me at the time as really we were getting ACRE DAOs off the ground. So ACRE DAOs launched officially December 1st of 2021 with an invitation for, everyone who signed up in December to be a founding member. So that was also the time that I personally was really curious about, what other DAOs, what Web3 looked like, who was really leading in the space. And so immediately, of course, Mirror stood out, and Seed Club and this mClub, which was a spinoff from Seed Club that was particularly focused on how creators could leverage the tools on the mClub blog. And so when I heard that there was a project with you and independent film, it just touched on some of my own personal interests in independent film. And so, yeah, so let's segue a little bit then, and maybe could you share a little bit about how you found out specifically about mClub and what was like the structure of working with a DAO in pursuit of, how you thought about benefiting or entering or connecting with Web3.
Yeah, I think, as I was saying, I started to look to Film3. Actually, a friend of mine, he is a developer, an engineer at Mirror. And so we were actually away, and the Ethereum film crowdfund on Mirror had just blown up essentially. It had been wildly successful. They'd raised over 2 million, and he had known that I was kind of pitching my idea in the Web 2 Film 2 space. He's like, hey, work at this place called Mirror. You should check it out. And it kind of just started me on this rabbit hole. And that was at the time for the Mirror token, the Mirror right race. So to even get on Mirror, I had to win the race. And that just led me to looking into kind of leaders in the space and connecting with them and kind of doing the elevator pitch of my idea and how I wanted to leverage, the Mirror application or the Mirror, platform to potentially raise funds for my film. And I got I got the attention of Jess Loss, who's at Seed Club, and he had said, this was back when mClub was just starting. He's like, I think this would be a great kind of pairing, your project and the support of mClub. And that kind of kicked us off. He put me in touch with John, Silky J, who kind of paired me up. We got paired together, and we started to try to think about like how can we, try to make a successful campaign, a successful crowdfund based on this idea, which I can go into detail on what the concept of the film is as well. But that kind of started us. Yeah.
At that time, was it mClub was like had its own treasury? If I know the history correctly, and maybe we could locate, was this sort of September, October of 2021 timeframe?
Yeah, I say roughly around then. Yeah.
Okay. So mClub had its own fundraise token sale on Mirror, like selling NFTs, I believe, to create a treasury for mClub. And then the idea was that mClub would give funding or grants to creators, in addition to helping you perhaps then have your own secondary fundraising. So there was sort of like both aspects, is that right, to the initial relationship?
Yeah, and I think everyone was just trying to figure out it as well. But there was an initial kind of, hey, we'd love to support you. We'll put in a sizable chunk of a committed grant, but we'd like to put it where in the form like when the crowdfund goes live, so that you can kind of get some kind of motion and momentum in the fundraiser. So obviously that was a big kind of, huge support to know that you had a sizable grant coming in to support the project. But we just felt like we would try to use it to leverage and get more traction from other fundraisers. Um, and then as far as the support goes, I think on the mClub side, they were trying to figure out, like how far could they go to help, structure a crowd fund, or what was their responsibility in all of this, and that was kind of where we were trying to figure out, how much responsibility they would take on versus the filmmakers and the creative team on my side.
We got a chance to catch up a little bit yesterday, Jackson. We covered a bunch of ground that I want us to talk about on this community call, and of course save time toward the end to open up for more dialogue and questions. But things like, and I think this is really relevant for ACRE DAOs, when you may be more established as an organization or project or person outside of crypto or outside of the so-called Web3 space, and then you're looking to enter the space and sort of take advantage of its potential, was one of the things that I think we want to talk about. And then for DAO members, or say communities that are trying to form and support other communities or other projects, what does that look like, and some of those challenges. But maybe before we get into kind of the DAO operations dynamics, I'd love to talk or hear a little bit more about the specific film, and maybe and also the podcast. Like, there was a lot that you were thinking about in terms of what the relationship would look like with mDAO, but let's hear more about this project, Not One Drop of Blood, how you heard about this story, and how it's going.
Yeah, right. So, keep it short. Our title of our documentary, our working title, is Not One Drop of Blood. And it's set in a remote eastern Oregon town where a haunting mystery lingers amid the bucolic landscapes. As the agricultural community continues to work through the changing seasons, the cowboys on the vast ranches are finding valuable young cattle mutilated with their sexual organs and their tongues precisely removed. There's often no trace of any tracks and not one drop of blood in sight. And that's kind of the elevator pitch we have. It's a very strange mystery that actually has a long decade-old history, cattle mutilations. But as we've grown, on this project, we've actually been attached with a journalist who first reported this in the region since 2019. It's become a lot more than kind of the theories behind the mutilation, and as much as more a ethnographic cowboy mystery, as I like to put it. This place is a really remote agricultural community that encompasses like a numerous amount of relevant cultural, historical, and political themes. At the core of the story is a rural community set amongst some of the most isolated parts of North America. It's largely family-run cattle ranches, and they're kind of culturally underrepresented in modern America. The odds of survival as isolated agricultural farmers are kind of stacked against them. One of the worst droughts of the last 40 years is threatening like many of the farmers' existences, and the growth of corporate farming across America continues to put them out of business. So there is this kind of existential existence for the agricultural community that creates a kind of duality with the mystery of cattle mutilations. And we think that there's like a relationship to be explored there. My filmmaking approach and my style is more in the verite observational style. So it's not kind of like a jam the story down your throat and talking heads tell you this and tell you that. It's how we can observe a community and understand them kind of holistically, without a lot of hand holding from the filmmaker's side. And so when I talked about the networks and when they first heard about our project, a lot of them were like, "Are you going to figure out who killed the cows?" But we were like, "Wait, what? No, that's why the mysteries existed for 50 something years. Is because there's a larger unique story there, which is why the mystery exists in the first place. What's the psyche behind this mystery? What's the relationship between remoteness and mystery? And why are ranchers, willing to believe that it's something malevolent that's doing this versus like a more logical, rational explanation? These are people that are very straight, hardline thinkers normally, and most are kind of, very logical, hardened, um, thinkers. And for them to say like, hey, this, what I'm seeing, when this is part of the magic, when you're out there and you're actually physically in sharing a space with the people that are reporting these cattle mutilations, is that they say, what I'm seeing is not normal. But for them, for that psyche is kind of what we wanted to understand. And so for that to happen, it's kind of patient storytelling, embedding storytelling, and really understanding the whole world holistically, not just focusing on the mutilations, but focusing on all seasons. And so we're going to tell the story from, seasonally, from spring when the calves are born to, winter where everyone's bunkered down, through to summer where the hay is harvested, and then to fall where, uh, livestock are sold off and the process starts again. So it's more it's more of a conceptual, artistic approach than people might think when you first say cattle mutilation.
Oh, and I can totally co-sign the artistic approach. It's like it's an art film, and it's beautiful. I mean, the clips that I've been able to see and your photography, um, I can really appreciate, particularly with you as an artist, why, the ultra independent film, I mean, independent film is already kind of a mavericky thing to be doing. But especially, I think the way you've talked about how you wanted to tell the story and what story you wanted to tell, and what also drew me to the project in sort of from an ACRE DAOs perspective, and regenerative issues of regenerative agriculture, climate, social justice, all of these kind of themes of improving society and benefiting the world. We've talked in this community about how like storytelling is so important. So, how do we get financing into these projects, and how do market or engage something that's so technical or abstract like the environment and debate around that? And so it just
And,
struck me. Yeah, go ahead.
and even on that, I think that what we've come, in the growth of this project and this, in almost the slow growth, has allowed us to really think. What we have is a really unique crossroads of, um, a crossroads of, it's to be honest, a very Republican area. The agricultural community also feels vilified.
Mm.
Over, they had asked us when we were out there, do you think the cowboy will ever be cool again? Beef in terms of climate change is seen as one of the biggest perpetrators. And so the agricultural industry is kind of like, uh, one of the most, under the microscope in terms of effects on climate change. But at the same time, they're like living through climate change experiences. The fires that they're out in Eastern Oregon and Oregon are horrible. They're increasing every year. They get worse every year. And then the drought is one of the worst in 40 years. So it's interesting to see if their perspective ever changes on climate change or not, where they cling to. So it's just a really unique place that is kind of underreported, and to give people an understanding of their lifestyle might help balance out and almost, just the equilibrium of understanding, if you get what I'm getting at.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's why what I love about contemporary art, um, in that you can you maybe communicate things in an emotional way or in a sensual way without hitting someone over the head with, this is what you should think, or here are the arguments. And so I love what you're talking about, which is like, and this is also what I think we can think about for more sort of cause-based or impact projects, that you can kind of tell a story or just present information that can, I don't say sort of bypass the intellect exactly, but just sort of register connection, or insight or inspiration that, is maybe personal for each person that's viewing it. And so, really great storytelling that's quite subtle, or maybe doesn't even, in like, I think what you're saying is like, it's not that it has a political message, but it's pretty unique information. I mean, from what I just, even without the question of climate change, like some of the clips that I saw that was raw, it wasn't Hollywood version of like what actually happens, like what the people are, what their lives are like, and what the work really is. That many of, we're so sanitized now, in terms of farming, with most of the population just seeing food in a package in a store and having no idea where it comes from, no sense of like the people involved and what they go through and their emotional and social and all of those dynamics.
Definitely.
So pivoting back a little bit to kind of what a Web3, so beyond fundraising, right? We can, and now's a great, we're in this moment of contraction, declining liquidity. You started this journey kind of in that blow off exuberance that now we
Exactly.
know was the peak, and now we're in a really different environment. So
Yeah.
even the initial like mechanism, and a lot of folks in impact and refi, I mean, this is what we have now, right? Oh, we'll sell NFTs, or do a crowdfund, and that's great. Like with the Ethereum film, they raised millions of dollars in one hit,
Yep.
and they were good. But in terms of a sustainable model, and what other benefits are there, if that you feel that there are, or potential for this DAO cooperation that goes beyond fundraising? Like, is there some other benefit that you thought of or you've explored in the past several months? And we kind of talked a little bit about like audience, whether that translates well from Web 2 to Web 3, or like in real world to crypto, and just wanted your current thoughts on the usefulness of engaging with DAOs or Web 3 above and beyond like a one-time like crowdfund.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's the difference of what's the difference between a regular crowdfund that has existed and has been used to fund films before versus one in the Film3 or Web3 space, right?
Yeah.
And
Like,
why Web3 space versus just doing a crowdfund on GoFundMe?
yep.
And part of it was the excitement and the idea of trying to create a new narrative in the filmmaking space, to be, an early adapter of the Film3 space, and also the idea of being a decentralized kind of autonomous uh, entity. Like it has its appeal, but um and it just seemed like, part of why I think a lot of us are in this space early on is that there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of good people um in the communities of the Web3 space. There was a lot of camaraderie, there was a lot of support, and that's what I found early on with mClub, and that's what encouraged me to push on. But then, in terms of crowdfunding, the Ethereum film is kind of like a unicorn, in that it's a film on Ethereum. It's very intrinsically tied to Web3. it had bucolic, and it was going to have not a very hard time drawing in an audience. It was a match made in heaven, essentially. So when you have such a idea as mine, you start to run into issues of I guess building community, finding. Uh, I mean, it essentially feels like now a bit of a popularity contest. Who is a better marketer? You know, to raise awareness of your project and to gain a following, to gain an audience. It seems those two things kind of mirror each other in both worlds now, and that's where we kind of put a pause to really, really rethink how we wanted to do this in an earnest Film3 kind of way and not just fall into the trap of doing a regular crowdfund. We wanted to really say like, and that's where we're at, kind of reforming our approach in the space is how do we do this kind of uh, in a Film3 way? How do we adopt uh, what were the idealistic notions about Film3? How do we not just make this a money grab? How do we make this an experience for the user as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and jog my memory. What else I should be answering about?
Yes, yes, no, I mean, I think we also were kind of reflecting on the challenge for you as the creator, the business person, the CEO, like all the different hats that you're
Mhm.
wearing. Um, and the audience you already have. I mean, you've got a huge network.
Yeah.
And what has your experience been like? Was that transferable? I mean, it's a leading question. Versus, I think the point you make about fundraising for things that are very crypto native,
Mm.
have a certain advantage, but they give this impression that like, oh, I can just roll into whatever this DAO stuff is, and I can raise, $1 million in 5 minutes. And there's
Yeah.
not a lot of transparency, or I don't want to say honesty, but I think there's a disconnect between the reality of who's successful and why, and what has gone on behind the scenes to secure those NFT sales that sell out in 5 minutes.
Definitely, definitely. And, I've been trying to connect with, that's what I was talking about, the marketing side, that there's a whole kind of, there's a game to it, you know? One is consistency for people that don't have an audience. And I was saying to you yesterday, it's kind of like bands might be a band for 3 years before they make it big, and they might have to play, to two people in an audience, and they continue to churn and churn and keep going until one day they kind of start to build a bigger following, and that takes a lot of time. And so that time factor is kind of not understood, especially in that boom day where we were just seeing a few success stories quickly happening. And you wonder, like, oh, how are they doing this? And there's not a lot of transparency there, even though uh, the whole concept is it's all transparent. Um, and so, yeah, um, part of it, what we were talking about yesterday was for me as a filmmaker that's built a career in just the Web 2 space and the existing structures is that no matter what, I was going to have to be balancing trying to raise funds the traditional way and trying to raise funds in the new space, something that I was constantly learning and trying to research. Um, and I have a very small team. And developing films is a not an easy game. You often have multiple films you have to juggle. But then I found myself having to juggle both the traditional landscape and the new landscape, and the time demands as a kind of pretty much solo filmmaker. I have some help, but I was more taking the lead in this Film3 space because a lot of people get confused in that space. And my partner was like, kind of like just letting it fall to my hands. And so the time it takes, number one, yeah, as everybody in this space really knows, the time that it takes the time commitments to really invest in the Film3 space and to make noise, you've really got to be consistent. And by consistent, it's like daily, you know, and
And
you've got to
it's
be.
like special content. It's like, and then it's a special, it's unique to like Web3, right? I mean, like the content, the language, the vibes, as we like to say. Would you say that, the whatever you might be doing marketing wise or even social media wise? I mean, that's also a question. Like, did you have a social media presence, or was that not even part of your
Wasn't even formed
model?
because that's not
Yeah.
necessary. Like that's not really necessary in the old space. It's a lot of behind the work, networking scenes, talking to networks, using agents. Going to production companies. It's all behind the scenes stuff. So that was never built. And then you also got to be kind of secretive about your project. So to be blasting it out across the internet is also concerning.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it's also, I'm not a marketer, I'm not a social media expert. So I was trying to pick up and learn that. And so I was trying to, that's where mClub came in to try to leverage. But also, I don't think they ever viewed themselves in their early conception as experts in that field either, and that's like that's where kind of things didn't fall apart, but there was a lot of questions that, like, I got put in touch with people that had that experience from mClub, but the time it was taking was a lot to ask of them too, because they
Yes.
also are part of multiple DAOs, and so that was what was happening in those early stages is people, whatever seemed to be kind of had the most momentum. People had quickly entered 3 DAOs. Whatever of those DAOs had the most momentum and had the most success was going to pull the most of their attention. And I think mClub was one of the later ones that just didn't fire quickly. Didn't have a big Twitter
Mm.
audience, and with something else already kind of with Seed Club taking off and having a lot of a bigger audience, well, you're naturally going to want to commit more time to that, and continue that success. So I think that was an interesting takeaway from that boom time is that people spread themselves pretty quickly, and it was almost like developing a film, right? There's a mirror there. Like I said, I have to juggle a lot of ideas, and you juggle those until one takes off, and you invest time, and then the others kind of take a back seat while the one that's able to get money can move forward and surge forward. And maybe that was what was happening in the DAO space too.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I kind of came on the scene with mClub, it was probably had just the initial like kind of launch enthusiasm momentum maybe had slowed, and then it was down to like, okay, now it's more of a grind, right? Now it's more of the day to day of what does it really mean to support creators. And I think the idea, and certainly what attracted me to uh, the DAO mClub and what we're at a high level really exploring here at ACRE DAOs, is what does that really look like, that support for a project or an entrepreneur in this space so that you can focus on what you do best, and then presumably, what's a question, right? Well, what does that look like? Like, what's the expertise? And then what does that mean for the DAO's organization? So the questions for mClub were like, are we a business DAO, right? Like, does mClub need to have a business model to fund this treasury? Because I mean, the initial crowd fund was going to be depleted. What does it mean for mClub? How can mClub deliver audience for you? Right? I mean, that was a key question and a challenge because mClub maybe had its own initial audience that came together for like a
And
high
that was the question:
concept.
was it their responsibility to deliver the audience? I don't necessarily think that they thought that, or I wasn't sure.
Well, I think we did. When I say we, it's a DAO. We can, it's open where we can always say we, but we at the
Yeah.
time definitely. But it didn't launch. And some of the questions were like, was it too broad, right? Creators broadly. So it didn't launch as like we are going to help independent filmmakers, and
Yeah.
then the audience for mClub. I mean, mClub can't give you an audience that it doesn't have. So I
Exactly.
mean, one of the so there was a lot of figuring out how to execute on that and deliver. I mean, one of the suggestions or one of the comments I was making at the time was, well, we need to create an identity within mClub that's maybe about being a patron, so that it's not about the particular project. Like, how do you get a group of people on standby ready to just support whatever we bring to them, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is that prestige, or what is that social
Right.
dynamic
Yeah, it's like, oh,
that
we're mClub, we support cool shit. Like, uh, like you're saying, if it's not specific, they would hope, but that all comes from like a proof of concept, you know, and so you have to have something first to almost build that. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think this is
that's
this
that's a
question.
conundrum. Yeah.
Well, it's part, we have the community have been like very deliberate and slow and not splashy. We haven't raised a treasury. We've not really whipped up from like, a kind of crypto hype or even bull market perspective. We're being really deliberate about, you know, how we grow. And I think that that's a space that is not super visible unless you're doing this kind of um, DAO organizational work. I see I is on the call, and he spoke on our last community call and is really expert in this kind of structure, like the structure, but it's not as interesting, or it's not the initial thing that attracts people to the space. And like with ACRE DAOs, like, oh great, we want to save trees or regenerative agriculture or education. And then there's this huge gap of like, well, we still have to design and architect the mechanisms organizationally to then begin to innovate and then actually then begin to support projects.
Yeah, it's a lot of steps, and often it's a few members. It dwindles down to a few kind of focused members, um, and that's also that's what I think has been happening within a lot of DAOs is responsibilities and everybody carrying their weight as we operate in kind of these early developing stages. People have to make a living as well, so there's a lot going on. And when I think about the mClub, it's maybe more, maybe not, in hindsight, maybe for creators that some funds, some of the grant funds should be released early to kind of allow artists to focus on raising more support, to go, because we were holding on to our funds to kind of go with the crowd fund. But then in hindsight, maybe it would be like maybe there's an incentive like for everyone to say like, okay, here's this. Now this is to focus and to follow through on, uh, uh, you know, devote devote time,
Mm.
because
Hire a social media hire a Twitter person.
yeah, or just like power through a week where you don't have to focus on everything else, like 5 million things. Um, is often thing, because that's maybe in hindsight, maybe we moved too slow. We were trying
Mm.
to be very deliberate, but we were trying to build an audience offline, because that was kind of, and get like devoted, like get get funds kind of promised pre-launch. So that's what we had heard had happened with kind of the Ethereum film and a couple others, is that people were getting pre-commits, so that when it went live, they felt like a bit of action. It wasn't actually all spontaneity. It was
Right.
actually kind of a thought out plan.
Preloaded.
Yeah.
Well, time is flying. We've got 15 more minutes, so I want to definitely open up for anyone who has comments or questions at this stage. Feel free to put anything in the chat.
Yeah, cool. It's a complicated place, really. I think just especially where we are now in the NFT space. Um, it, it, I think I think it's probably necessary for a little of the hype to die down, for everybody to do a bit of soul searching and really think. That's why I like ACRE DAOs is the mission is a good one. You know what I mean? It's a positive one. It's not a selfish one. It's a mission driven type of DAO, which is where I think the space makes the most sense, personally.
And the innovation in financing and markets coming together with causes, or and in many ways I feel like I'm inspired by not so much pushing or advocating a particular cause, but just opening up the access for really anyone. It feels like part of what's broken, big picture, is that the flexibility, the ease for more people to be incentivized to, say, contribute, right? I mean, like, whether it's the cost of incorporating and running a business, regulation, things that just strangle and make it really only possible for these mega corporations to do business, or like the most well capitalized, well connected individuals and organizations is just really kind of the only game in town anymore. And what are we losing? And particularly as we're often asking so many big questions and there are no answers, part of, I think, the inspiration with ACRE DAOs and decentralization conceptually is that there's better information locally, and you can access and coordinate larger numbers for smaller amounts. So as I think about your project and your work, theoretically, and we're still figuring this out, like in terms of tools, we're on this Discord app and there's so many different apps, but like theoretically, there's so many interesting intersections of what you're doing, right? I mean, it's like you have independent film fans, you've got the particular story that's the weird part of the story, but then also what's happening on the land and the community. And for you to be able to reach, I mean, it's the same thing we talked about 20 years ago with the long tail, like when we first had YouTube and the internet, and being able to actually create businesses and markets and opportunities out of like very, very niche groups. And I guess what's supposed to be different, or maybe this Web3 versus Web2, is there's something about automation and software, and then there's something about digital money or digital value. Is there any aspect of Film3 or your work as you see it over the next, years, where the cryptocurrency itself, or like the representation of digital value, is part of what you're thinking about? Like, have you thought about utilizing the technology in any way beyond just kind of getting fiat money to pay the bottom line expenses?
I think that's where I'm most interested in figuring out. I don't think I have a clear answer on it. But when I was
Yeah.
saying taking our time to really, in this kind of lull moment, to really rethink about how it's integrated into this film, and it's not just about the sponsorship, how it becomes part of the landscape more than just like, hey, this was funded in the Film3 space, or like inserting, a reference to NFT seems very surface level.
Mm.
So I think the question you pose there is something that I'd love to pose into the Not One Drop of Blood Discord, because that would kind of transcend this to a more kind of more like a kind of integrated space, you know?
Yeah, because it
And
wasn't it wasn't really investing in the film in the strict sense of the word, right? Because we talked about this as well as we were brainstorming about what the offering was and some of the language. Would people get
yeah,
producer credits for owning an NFT? And it's a little bit of a fiction, right? Like, so I think it'd be super interesting to think about the actual business and ownership of the film or distribution rights or
mhm,
digital asset that gets you, that puts all of that on the blockchain and makes it tradable. Like, what would that look like?
exactly. And that is more intriguing. And that's probably where the mClub probably that conversion of like how do we make that the reality, probably where mClub's lane probably was more uh, apt. They were probably more apt for that because that was they were coming with the blockchain expertise. That somebody like a creator, like they was trying to support creators that were kind of fresh in the space, and help them understand the technology in a way, and
Well, this
so
is
yeah,
sorry. Well, I was going to say this is where I feel like we're in ACRE DAOs in this interesting intersection between like social DAO movement and NFT versus the hardcore DeFi, the like decentralized finance. Because really, I feel like mClub was more in that social space, like creating community and
mm,
having that, but like to actually put film finance and create an on-chain market, and you could imagine like speculation on these digital assets that give you the rights to a film before it launches. And so people might speculate there could be a secondary market for participating in a film. um, Maybe that's something we can look into in this community. Like, I've actually thought of this, and I'm not aware of. I'll have to do some research. I don't know if anyone's
I think that like the
working
surface
on that.
levels, like yeah, we see like we've looked into Blockbuster DAO, but they were looking to like buy out the Blockbuster trademark, like company, and make it into something else. But um,
They just had an announcement yesterday. Did you see that?
no, what was it?
Oh, Dish said no, thanks, but no thanks.
Ah,
So they've relaunched with a new name called Rewind.
right.
Um, but that was for those who may not know, it was a big movement, very grassroots. And I met with the community. They had a happy hour in East Denver back in February, and very inspiring story and huge community. A lot of nostalgia there. It's sort of in the line with the whole meme stocks and AMC. And I think the founders were very careful about not, I don't want to speak for them, but what I heard at the time and my sense is they really were trying to negotiate to legally figure out what would that look like to have the legal right to use that name with the owners before they went ahead and like fundraised as a community. So I think they were particularly really smart. And even though they had this huge community, they didn't entangle themselves in a way that they could have. I mean, they could have gone out and raised a huge amount of money off of all that hype with Blockbuster DAO, which would have maybe been quite challenging and risky from a liability standpoint. Um, but yeah, they're carrying on, and I think it's a great example of maybe the inflection point we're all in, where it's like, how can we convert the enthusiasm as markets compress, like the dot-com bubble and all these things. You get a lot of speculation, a lot of hype. There's unfortunately a lot of scams and fraud.
Mm-hmm. And how to make it not confusing for new people, you know.
Yeah,
Uh, there's a lot of, not similar to like Rewind or Blockbuster DAO. There's a few other Film3 kind of entities, arising, but it needs to be digestible for it to grow as well. So that's the challenge that we look ahead towards. Um, people see the simplicity of an NFT, of purchasing an NFT, of owning an artwork or buying a Bored Ape, or joining that kind of community relatively is a transaction. It's collecting.
Mm.
It's something different than what we're talking about, and like you said, restructuring like financial investment structures, I guess. So
It's
yeah.
almost like creating muscle memory. It may be easy to poo-poo it, but it ends up being like a building block of relating in a certain way, of using certain tools, because without that, you couldn't just like spring a digital film asset participation market kind of onto the world. In some ways, I think what has occurred, we'll see tremendous value, even though a lot of people have gotten hurt and are, I don't think we're done yet with the declines, but
The winter
certainly, yeah, the crypto winter.
in summer.
We've just got a few minutes, and maybe my final question for you, Jax, is: has it been worthwhile, and will you continue to your exploration of Web3 and working with a DAO? Will you continue to invest precious time exploring Film3 and crypto and all of that as part of your business?
I think I will. Number one, I'm proud of myself for deep diving in the first place and having an understanding. I think it's a really exciting future, and I continue to keep up and try to stay literate in the space and where it's moving. It's the way my brain tries to understand things. Um, it's a very visual type thing, but this is all sometimes kind of theoretical, and so it's just continually evolving. And so I'm trying to stay patient, and continue to learn and find ways and find examples that like I love to see examples of things playing out. And like I said, I have tried to just take a pause, invest more time in the Film 2 space, get some financing in place so I'm not stressed, and the film can continue to move forward. And then I know in my schedule, I have some breathing points after that hurdle is reached that I can refocus back into the Web3 space. And I don't think it's going away anywhere. And I think I'll come back bigger and stronger than our first kind of pokes at the beast. You get what I'm saying? So I'm not leaving the space altogether. I'm not burnt out by the space. I just think I want to come back with a new vigor, a new thought out approach, and kind of bigger and better type idea.
Well, we'll be following and are in your corner and excited to, see what you're going to do and follow the project. And hopefully when you're checking back in to Web3, maybe we'll have something more to share on the business side of things, beyond the crowdfund, which is awesome. But I think we talked about some really interesting ideas that could help other
Yeah,
entrepreneurs as well.
yeah, and I think that's where I want to see myself fall into, and kind of grasp that uh, bull by the horn some more, not to throw it back to cattle thing. So I'm so thankful for your support, Kianga, and you're always such a supporter of my kind of art and my approach, and we will always keep the conversation continuing. So
I'm
I
always good for a retweet.
for sure.
It looks like I is maybe typing something. Just yeah, interesting idea. Thanks.
Cool.
So wonderful. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for joining our June community call. That's a wrap. We'll see you on the last Thursday of next month. And until then, we'll just catch you in the Discord and around. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.